Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our third webinar in the Southern New South Wales Drought Resilience Adoption and Innovation Hub Expanded Horizons series. This is brought to you by Charles Sturt University and supported by the Australian Government's Future Drought Fund. I would like to start by acknowledging the Wagaya people, who are the traditional custodians of the land I'm joining you from today. And I also acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land from which each of you are joining us today. I wish to pay my respects to their elders, both past and present, and extend that respect to other Indigenous Australians who may be present today. My name is Prue Cook. I'm from Nine Creeks Consulting, and I am your webinar host across this series. So this webinar series challenges you to think differently regarding how we approach extension and adoption in Southern New South Wales, particularly concerning drought resilience and agtech and biosecurity. During this series, we'll expose and engage hub partners and collaborators with novel thinking and new ideas from other sectors, industries and countries to stimulate new approaches to extension and help drive meaningful practice change for our communities. Our guest for today is Jo Eady from Rural Scope, and we're going to be exploring co-design and what makes co-design authentic and powerful. Jo will be chatting about facilitating co-design, sharing some fantastic resources, and she's got a great model for co-design. Jo's here to inspire us to think about the value of co-design in our work. Now, Jo and I are going to be having what we're calling a fireside chat today. I'm actually under a heater, but I hope that you're all warm wherever you are. We want you to be a part of it in a way that makes sense to you. So this can be through asking questions or sharing your own co-design wins or challenges through the chat function anytime, which you should see on the right-hand side of your screen. We can also invite you on stage if you want to be a part of the chat, or you can just feel free to share an emoji at any time that we're talking about, anytime that what we're talking about resonates with you. You should also see on your right-hand side a little tab at the top called Handouts. If you go to that now, you'll see a couple of postcards that Jo has shared with us around mindsets and co-design that will be really useful to you in both understanding the context for what we're going to talk about today, but also something that you can download and take away and use as you go out and practice co-design from here on in. Now, if you do need to leave at any time, you will be sent a recording after the webinar finishes, so please don't stress if that is the case. Now, Jo, tell us a little bit more about you, your business, and how you've come into co-design.
Well, hello and thank you, and a very special welcome to each and every one of you from me who has joined. Like Prue has just said, I would love it to be more of a fireside chat and a conversation. I know so many of you will have had exposure to, you'll have participated in co-design. I think we might even have some co-design specialists that have joined us today. So in pure co-design fashion, I would love for this to be as engaging as possible. And so I just endorse your comments, Prue, about popping stuff into the chat and sharing some of your experiences, because co-design is very much about it's a social process, and it's very much also a process around engagement and participation. So we're under the pump, I reckon, today in terms of can we get that engagement? Can we get that connection happening? So I ask each of you that's on the call to come to my aid, if you like, and get involved as much as you possibly can. And I'm loving people saying hello in the chat already, so please keep that up. So I'm coming to you today from South Gippsland in Victoria, right down in the southernmost part of the mainland, near Wilson's Promontory. I haven't checked our thermometer today, but I'm guessing it's probably about 9 or 10 degrees, so it's pretty chilly here. I have a business called Rural Scope, which Prue mentioned, and the company's been alive now for about 22 years. And I love the work that I do across Australian agricultural and rural sectors and rural communities. And I call myself a human-centred facilitator and utilise human-centred approaches. And realistically, all that means for me is it's kind of like people first, and a really strong belief and care for people, because I believe that's where the change processes start. I've got a psychological background, a counselling background, and an educational background. So those three things come together to, I hope, give me the opportunity to share and care as I meet and talk with you all today. I think maybe I'll just mention too, because it's the Southern New South Wales Innovation Hub, how I got to be here with you all today. And the hub's commenced, I don't know the real timelines here, but I think it's about 18 months or so ago. And I had a contact from Cindy Cassidy, who heads up the Southern Innovation Hub in New South Wales. And she just said, hey, Jo, we're looking at wanting to have high participation, high engagement. We're wanting to include people who have different views, people who have similar views. We really want to tap into some of your engagement and design expertise. Would you be willing to work with us? And I said to her, had she thought about methodology? Was there a methodology? And that's when co-design came up. And I said, absolutely, I'm in, because I love the concept of co-design. And when I even looked at it further for the hub's benefit and value, I even got even more excited by it.
Fabulous. Thanks.
Look at all the hellos. Hello,
There's
everybody.
people from everywhere. It's great. Oh, and we've got a farmer online. Hi, Elle. Okay, so I'd love to know, Elle, or I'd love to know from anybody who's willing to share in the chat, have you been involved in a co-design process? Or is this something that's new for you? Absolutely. And Jo, in our conversations about preparing for this webinar, you were saying that, you're talking to a lot of people and they're like, oh, well, what you're talking about sounds like we actually do co-design. It's something that we do. It's implicit in what we do every day. So what isn't co-design?
Yeah, this is, well, here's a curly one to start with, because, I was expecting the what is co-design. So, this is lovely because this is the difference that we're talking about. Look, co-design isn't lots of things. Co-design isn't a facilitation tool. It isn't a facilitation tactic. Co-design is not something that you jump into after you've got funding and go, okay, quick, how do we actually use co-design? Co-design is not something that you would use with a simple fix. Co-design is for complex systems change. Co-design is not for technical transfer of information. It's for, connection. It's for social engagement. Co-design is not PowerPoint presentation. Co-design is not collaboration. It's not consultation. Those are parts of a co-design approach or a co-design process, but they are not terms that you can use and exchange with co-design.
Perfect. So what we're talking
about... Can I say, co-design is not a quick fix. Co-design is not a quick fix. Co-design is a staged process where you look at, different tactics and different tools. And I can see Georgie's online, and Georgie's from Red Earth Foundation in Queensland. And I would hope she might agree with me that co-design processes can take years to develop the connection and the engagement within communities. We're talking communities mostly, I think, today, within communities to create that change. Once that engagement is there, once that investment in people, it actually moves like wildfire. It's really, really powerful.
So how do we get to that point that we can make it move like wildfire, Jo? Let's talk about the people component first. So this is about making sure that we have people with lived experience at the table. How do you make that happen?
So this, I think, steps us right back to what we call the design part. So when we look at, so many of us as facilitators are like, okay, I really want to get 20 people around the table. Gosh, someone's going to judge me unless I get 20. In fact, for many people, it's often built into a funding agreement that you have to have 20 people around the table. And so it becomes this transactional tick and cross approach of, oh yeah, well, I've got John, oh yeah, I've got Jo, oh yeah, I've got Prue, okay, that'll do. And so we're very focused on how many people we get, the old term of bums on seats. I think the design element, which, comes into co-design, obviously, is around setting up the value proposition and the best approach to make it so valuable, the event or the forum or the project or the solution, because co-design is often best used when there's a complex issue or a complex systems failure. And then once that's so compelling, people will actually want to engage. If we keep doing what we've always done, by engaging in communities through this, got to get the numbers on. And then the other one I've heard is, oh, well, our region covers from here to here, so we better have a workshop in the northwest, and we better have a workshop in the southeast, and we better have one smack bang in the middle, etc. And I think what happens with that is we miss people wanting to be engaged, because many people want to actually be involved in more creative pursuits that go sometimes beyond their immediate geography.
Sorry, Jo, I'm just looking at Dana sent a message. Yes, this session is being recorded. So if you've come in a little bit late, this will be, if you do need to duck out early, it'll be emailed to you directly afterwards. And we've also, if you look at the top section with your handouts on the right-hand side, if you click on that, you'll be able to see 2 postcards that Jo has shared, which will be able to help you contextualize, and you can take that and use that after today as we go through. Okay, so Jo, how do we get end users and those with lived experience to sit around the table?
Yeah, this is I was actually asked just recently about this, about you spark their interest, and so by doing that, the issue or the coming together engagement must be done in a way that people actually want to be there. I mean, I work and live in a small rural community, and I would always wish to be involved in a community activity that was going to benefit my kids or our community or our region in some way. So the issue with farmers, I think at the moment, if I can generalize, is that they're fatigued, and so they don't wish to just come to a consultation day, and they certainly don't want to come with facilitators who are very accomplished at using butcher's paper or sticky notes only. Now, take me back, just wind me back to the question. How do we engage with them?
But we'll get back to butcher's paper and sticky notes as well too, because we've had some good chats about that one. But the question was, how do we get people with lived experience around the table? I'm certainly thinking about a local committee that I've just stepped onto, which is actually been really great at getting lived people with lived experience. Hopefully they're all lived people, but people with lived experience to the table. But then once they're there, the structure around the committee just doesn't allow them to participate. So, how can we get them to the table? And then once they're there, ensure that there's scope, that people who might not be used to standing up in front of a group, they might not feel comfortable with, and that structure and formal processes might intimidate them. How can we make that a safe place for them not only to feel comfortable, but know that their experience is actually what we're wanting to learn from?
Yeah. So I'm gonna draw on the work of Kellyanne McKercher, and for everybody, Kellyanne McKercher is one of Australia's leading experts in co-design. And she has that book that Prue's just showing. One of the things that I think is super important when you bring people and you get them around the table is that you share the power. So people are accustomed, especially in our rural communities, to coming onto a committee and there's a formal power structure. Whether we like it or not, it exists. And people will say, yeah, but Jo, it has to because of governance and all the rest of it. I think there's a way that you can share, what they call the agency now, you can share the power. And what that means is that, you break down some of the structures and some of the ways of doing that I don't think have always served us well when we're looking at creating, solution, product, service from an issue. And I just ask each of you now, just picture this. The last time you went into a meeting, did you enter through the door? Was the room set up in probably a U shape? Was there a presenter table at the front of the room? Was there a lectern at the front of the room? And what happened? What happened at the meeting? Who stood at the lectern? Who sat at that front panel table or that front presenters table? And how did they engage? Or can I suggest, how didn't they engage with their audience? Because if someone's taken the time and energy to come into a room where they may not find it their most familiar kind of setting, then we need to share that power base. And that just means that everyone has the right to sit where they want. Perhaps don't take the lectern, don't take the presenter's table. If you're accustomed to, sort of chairing, if you like, because there has to be a designer in the room, there's got to be someone who facilitates the process. But maybe do that from the back of the room, or do that from the side of the room, or somewhere where it's not the culturally ordinary place to do that. People will feel more comfortable, they'll feel more cared for in that process, and hence they'll be more likely to share. The other thing is that we are not all programmed to enjoy the speaker conversation. Some of us are more, well, we're all programmed for connection. That's what we're wired for. And so how do you create that connection? Well, you won't if there's a guest speaker at the front of the room who's merely going through important information, but doing so from a PowerPoint presentation. So I would be encouraging the designers, the facilitators in the room, and all of the participants to be operating in a socially connected way first, to build trust and to build, fairness of this shared power, so that people will then feel comfortable to participate. And use sticky notes if you want. Use butcher's paper if you want, but please don't have those as the only things that you use to engage. They may play well into the hands of the kinesthetic learner, but they won't necessarily play well into the hands of the auditory learner or the auditory participant.
So, Jo, we've talked about how we can get, those with lived experience who may not be used to, these formal type activities to the table. You talk about sharing the power. What about the professionals in the room who are used to this and used to getting into a workshop and sitting down and nutting stuff out and trying to get, to an outcome as quickly as possible? How can we encourage them to share power and, give space and listen to and incorporate ideas of those with lived experience?
I think you've hit on something really, really important here, because it's something that I see often, where people want to offer the fix. People want to offer the solution. So, imagine a rural community in pain, fire, flood, cyclone, drought, suicide, all this kind of stuff goes on every day in many of our rural communities. It's only natural that our fabulous experts, our fabulous scientists, researchers, and care professionals, it is only natural that they wish to come in and provide a fix to be able to take away that pain. And in fact, often a government, if they're funding, will want them to do that, and they will want that to be an immediate fix. Co-design is for the long game. Co-design is to create innovation and to sprout innovation. It is not something that should be used for someone just to share a quick fix or to dump some expertise in this space, because the expertise will stay sitting on the table when everybody walks out the door. And what we want in co-design is for everybody to want the information that's shared and to be internalising that and to be reflecting on it in their own situations, and definitely to take it out the door with them. How many of you have been in a workshop and facilitated a workshop, or been a participant in a workshop, and everyone gets up to leave the room and handouts are left on the table? I think that's a sign for all of us around, hey, that didn't quite engage, as well as what it possibly could.
So, Jo, we're sort of focusing in on, I suppose, a workshop or an event. But, one of my frustrations is, people come to me and can you hold an event? Can you run this an event? And this is the outcome that we want. But what you do before and after that particular event with co-design is so important to getting where you want to be. So what's the type of things that we can be doing before and after this event to ensure that it's not the one-off workshop where everyone goes, oh, that was really useful, but then nothing gets action, nothing continues, networks aren't built.
So I think the first thing to say there, Prue, is that if it's a one-off workshop, I think we are just decreasing our chance of any engagement, any connection, and any take-up. And so the first thing I would be saying is, please, 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 if you're asked to do that, also ask the investor, or also ask the host of that, the event that they're asking for, where does this fit within the bigger design picture? Design, it's like designing a house. You don't just say that's the bathroom and it's got no connection to anything else. So co-design is the same. You want to design the process to not for an outcome, but you design the process for an approach. And now might be the time, if you've clicked on the handouts that Prue loaded there, one of the little postcards, I think it was the second one that was loaded, is called Co-Design Model, and it comes from the work of Emma Blomkamp. And Prue, if it's okay, I might just quickly refer to this now, because when you look, it looks like this, everybody, and when you look at it, it's kind of like, oh, wow, lots of words on there. But I just want to share that a co-design approach, or as I've put on here, a model, consists of 5 Ps. So the first P is the principles that slip around the outside of that circle. They will be things that you are very familiar with, I'm sure. Purpose-driven adaptive learning, self-determination is a really important one that I don't know that we have done always well in our facilitation experiences. So principles are really important, and to be intentional and to be super conscious and aware when you design any co-design process, or when you design any facilitation workshop, to be aware of what principles you will bring in. The second is about people. Then it's about what process. It's about the place that you will use or you will hold some of these co-design events in. And then it's about what practices or what methods that you would use. This is the tool that turned me on the most when I did the work with Cindy and Dale at the Innovation Hub in Southern New South Wales, because for a long time, I think we have been in that mindset of got to run a workshop, got to get as many people in as I can, got to give lots of people the opportunity to participate, engage, and have their say. And it's not linked to what comes before in the design, and it's not linked to the process that comes after the workshop. So for me, these 5 Ps are super important to sit down and have, especially if you're a funder or if you're, like the organizer, like a hub would be, it would be, what people do we need around this table? Who can bring the knowledge and the wisdom that is required? Who can bring the difference? And then what place should we hold this in? Where should it be? And are we looking at a place which is like a whole of systems approach, or are we looking at something which, as you said, is like a one-off workshop? And just be really real and intentional about that. And then from a facilitation perspective, the exciting part, or not exciting part, but as exciting, is around, okay, what process am I going to use? What practices, what tools and tactics am I going to use? And no, it shouldn't always be sticky notes and butcher's paper.
Perfect. So look, people listening in online, if you would like to now type in the comments section, if there's anything that you are doing that's co-design, or something that you're doing that you think should be co-design, you've got some ideas or some challenges that you're working with, throw them up. Jo, you've mentioned that the model that you've just shared is something that funders should really be aware of. If you are working with your organisation or a funder and you're wanting to get some traction on co-design, and there might not be this knowledge or this, certainly not this model to work with, what would be some advice that you'd have to get organisational buy-in for using this approach, particularly if you said that it's, it can be a journey, it can be a long time?
Yeah. I would go back to the investor and go back to, the host and say, where does this fit? Can I help you? Can I help you to see where this one event might sit within the full scope? Can I please engage with people across the community before we get to this one-day workshop? That's a favourite of mine. In terms of a tactic, one of the things I absolutely love doing is when asked to facilitate a forum, a workshop, an event, it's like, I don't ever want to walk in without having a connection or having learnt about a community, about what their issues are, about what their accomplishments are, before I walk in on that day. And so it could be a survey, it could be a round of quick phone calls. It's an invitation to people in that community, the end users, and those with lived experiences, to share exactly what's going on, as opposed to what the investor tells me is going on, or the funder tells me is going on, or the host tells me what's going on, because otherwise we can't get the connection. So I would go back to the funder and ask for a little bit of time, ask for a little bit of money to be able to do this upfront work. Because without that, I would be concerned that running a one-off event would not get the connection. And Georgie indicated earlier, and Cindy indicated earlier, excuse me, after years of working in co-design space, these communities are now really getting their power on.
Okay. Grab a drink of water there, Jo. Now, I'm going to bite because we've mentioned butcher's paper and sticky notes for a little bit now, and you've talked about the processes that you can use to do co-design. So I want to have a little bit of a chat about that. And let's start with butcher's paper and sticky notes. Now, those listening in your chat bar, you'll see a little smiley face. If you click on that, you've got some emojis. If you love butcher's paper and sticky notes, give us a love heart. If you're indifferent, a thumbs up. And if you're not for it, give us a thumbs down. But Jo, you and I were both sharing some anecdotes, and I see Tracy Dart from Warwick Nabil's online, and it was a Warwick Nabil farmer that I was talking to that said, look, you bring out sticky notes and butcher's paper, I'm gone. Anything that I have to, get up and stand in front of an audience with, I feel that farmers really don't relate to that particular type of facilitation technique. Mm. So we've got a mix of that. I'm seeing no love hearts. Yeah. Please feel free to share. I think most people are indifferent, but there's a couple who aren't that keen. Talk about process.
There's a lot of thumbs up. There's a lot of thumbs up in there. So, there's a love heart. Thanks for the love heart, Georgia. There's a huge one. There's a big red one. I'm loving it. So I think this is where I come back to my comment. I too have those farmers who come up to me, or anybody really, before you start a workshop, who says, wow, there's a lot of coloured sticky notes there. Do we really have to use that? The first comment that I would make is that, again, go gently with the sticky notes and also with the butcher's paper, because I have a feeling that and some of you please comment in the chat about this and see whether you reckon I'm on the right path. I think when people see those sticky notes and butcher's paper, I think that people will go, oh no, I have to do something. Oh no, I can't just sit and listen, which might be that person's preferred operandi. She's going to make me do something that I actually don't want to do in facilitation. So if you've got texters and butcher's paper and sticky notes on the table, just say, these are among things that we may use. I invite you. In co-design, we do a lot of invitation. And so what we do a lot of is I invite you to write on the sticky notes as we go. Like what we're doing today, I invite you to put your comments into the chat. And it's not with I invite you, please do it, do it, do it. Be genuine. Be genuine, because connection comes from connection comes from the sincerity and your genuineness. So the other thing that I think we need to be really mindful of when we are using co-design is that part of our role as co-designers, part of our role as facilitators when we're in the room, is to assist people to be able to get an understanding of mindset shift. And so this is where I can give my plug for the other piece of exciting work when I started to work with Cindy and Dale was around, I did some international research and ended up in New Zealand with the Auckland Collab. And the very first handout that Prue loaded for you was a handout that I got, and I just went, oh my gosh, this is what happens when people are sitting inside the rooms that we're facilitating. Everyone sits with on a different space of a continuum. And so have a look at those mindsets. Some of the mindsets are things like fixed to growth. And so can you imagine if somebody's sitting in a workshop or in a room and you're asking them to grow, you're asking them to offer up, come outside of a comfort zone, you're asking them to move the dial on their continuum of comfort. And that's not always easy for people to do. So whose responsibility is it to change? I certainly believe it's mine as a facilitator.
I just want to run through a couple of comments and questions that we've got in, Jo. So Georgie's said it's also important to be comfortable that you might not know what the outcome might be. And I think that's really critical, because in my facilitation work, you feel, right, we've got to give these people an outcome. So I think that's a really important thing to be mindful of. Diana, when she sees sticky notes and butcher's paper, wants to A, switch off, B, leave the room, and C, drink copious amounts of red wine to dull the pain. Rachel's got a really good comment. We recently ditched the sticky notes and extended the discussion time instead. So growers validated the in-depth discussion. And that's, goes back to what you mentioned before about our, propensity towards listening to stories and connection, is that, let's try and do that. And then Amanda said, seeing sticky notes and butcher's paper makes me think, thank goodness we are going to do something interactive today. It's not just going to be a talk fest. So this is, that's something I like to do, at the start of any workshop, is do an activity that allows me to gauge where people are at, but also let everybody else in the room see that everybody is coming from different perspectives. They've got different positions. So everybody's going to get something different out of today. And as Georgie said, notes enable her to hear the quieter voices as well too.
Yeah. And the invitation that I was saying before, it's not uncommon, for me to ask in a workshop, show me your word. So I'll ask people to write a word on a piece of paper and just show me your word. And if I could see all of your fabulous faces, I would have done an activity like that. But that's what we're trying to do in the chat group, because some people actually don't want to speak. Okay, they literally just don't want to speak. And so it's, hey, jot down that word, show me the word. And the next person might say, hey, can I talk to mine? Yeah, sure, you can talk to yours. Give people the same amount of space if you possibly can. But it's our responsibility, I think, to co-design a process which enables those quieter voices to come forward, which enables those over speakers just to settle back into themselves. And the butcher's paper, the sticky notes, gives the opportunity for people to express, not just in word, but also in visual.
So Jo, you've got some examples of co-design processes that you've seen that have been really effective that you can share with us?
Yeah, so this is an interesting one, and I think there are people on our call today. I would just encourage some of you, I'm not going to name you, but I do see some names that are familiar there. I would love people to place in the chat something like, we are using co-design too. Okay, so we are using co-design too, and then finish the sentence. I think it'd be really lovely if some of you could have a go at doing that. We are using co-design too. When I was reflecting on co-design, and I've been given the opportunity to do this by the Southern New South Wales Innovation Hub, I've challenged myself about, am I a co-designer? So am I? When Cindy and Dale asked me to look at this, Cindy was very strong on, hey, Jo, I've been in the room with you. I know that you are. I wasn't so convinced about that. And so I've taken time to think back over some of the projects that we've worked on, some of the ways that I've designed those projects, being a human-centered facilitator. And I do stand here today with my hand on my heart saying, yeah, I can claim to be a co-designer. And I've aligned that with some of the experts that we've worked with. And Dale and I have also been part of an international best practice group with Emma Blomkamp. And so we've kind of done our skills there. So long way of saying, many, many years ago, we facilitated a project around dairy deregulation called Dairying Beyond 2000. It was a well-funded project that came from the equivalent of the Dairy Research and Development Corporation, or Dairy Australia as it's known today. One of the things that I most vividly remember is we actually went to our steering committee and said, we want farmers around the table. Okay, we had the researchers, we had the resellers, we had the AI kind of people around there. They go, oh, really? But we're doing it for farmers. We're doing it to farmers. And I remember saying, no, we're doing it with them. We want them to understand, and we want to work with them around this deregulation. And we got opposition from that. We are the experts, as you said before. We're the knowledge brokers here. We want to be able to place this information at farmers' fingertips. We won in the end, and we paid a team of 6 farmers, dairy farmers from across Queensland, and they became the co-design, or part of what we now know as the co-design process for their regions. It unlocked the project like I've never seen a project unlocked before. They got to choose guest speakers. They got to hold mini meetings where they discussed with farmers what would make a difference with this upcoming workshop, what would make a difference if we could use this co-design process well. And to this day, I have this question in my mind around, was it because we paid them, that they were able to unlock? I don't think so. I think it was because the communication and the connection was so strong because the project utilised people from within their communities.
So I've got two questions that stem from that, Jo. One is, was what the farmers said that they wanted, was that sort of different to what had initially been proposed by,
Well, they even changed the name. Can you believe? I can't remember the name of the project in other states, that the investor said, no, I can't remember it. The investor said, this is the name of the project. I remember they said, that's not going to grab our farmers. Can we change it? And so Dairying Beyond 2000 was the name that they changed it to. In terms of, were the end users, were the farmers knowledgeable about what their needs were? Oh, yeah, they were. They knew what would make a difference for them. And they were clearly able to articulate no problem at all. And I would go so far as to say that happens in the community that I live and work in. Nobody doesn't know what they don't want. Everyone knows what would make a difference. And there's that whole psychology around, the $1 million question. If we could change one thing to make your world far better than what it is today, what would it be? And I imagine if you all use that in your facilitation, you would know that it usually unlocks an answer. And if not, then back to the facilitator to facilitate an approach whereby they're able to provide impetus and input to gain a greater level of creativity. Shared wisdom is an amazing thing in a group.
So that's a really interesting point, Jo, is that you've got to ask the right questions to get the right information. So have you got some examples of sort of some of the key questions that you would be asking to try and elicit the information that you need to get, useful information for co-design? I know it's going to be highly dependent on the situation, but what are some of the key things that you're wanting both people with lived experience to be able to articulate and the professionals in the room to be able to hear?
I mean, one of the things that I always want to know, and one of the things that I ask, and I often start a session based on this. Now, a session meaning a workshop, or a session meaning right at the beginning when there's a few of us chatting, maybe in a hotel or in a coffee shop. I always say, well, what can I bring? What can I bring? Or what could you bring, Prue? What could you bring, Georgie? And we have to be honest and upfront about what we can bring. So I often ask that question. I often ask a question of, if things were different in 5 years and they were better, they were more positive, more prosperous, what would that look like? So that it assists people to start to think and have their creative focus come from the here and now and into the future. And I really love this. We use this PPF, which is past, present, future. And one of the tools that I will always use when I'm, regardless of what group I work with, I always listen for how much of the conversation that we're having here collectively is in the past. And that's usually issues based. We're talking about issues, issue this, issue that, it'll never work. How much of the conversation are we having in this collaboration that is around present? Okay, and sometimes that's useful to set context, but I'm really interested in working through how much of the conversation are we having that's future focused, that's solutions focused, that's creativity and innovation focused, and what percentage of the conversation do you think is in the future? It's certainly not 75%.
I really enjoyed so Jo set me homework to read Beyond Sticky Notes as part of facilitating this session with you. And I really like that they're like, try and incorporate the arts in your activities. And one of the suggestions, and while this is sort of looking more towards social issues, Jo and I were laughing the other day that one of the suggestions was to use slam poetry. And so we were wondering how that might go down with a farmer audience. Jo, I might just read out some of the ways that our audience members are using co-design. So using co-design to help our region determine its future, to understand what people are already doing in a certain area, what works, what doesn't, and identify gaps. We're using co-design through a theory of change approach. Oops, sorry, I lost where I was. To design new projects, ensuring outputs and outcomes are clear and relevant to industry and farmer on farm impact priorities. We're using co-design to work with Aboriginal communities. They have the power to control who is involved, where the activities will take place, what process we will use, how information is stored, and who can access the stories. Absolutely. We're using co-design.
I mentioned Prue just recently that I don't have this experience of working in Indigenous communities. It's something that I would love to do. It's on my bucket list to do, because the learnings of the shared connection, the wisdom sharing, the storytelling, these are all tactics and tools that I think firmly align to co-design. So whereas you'll see in literature, if you just Google co-design, it'll tell you that it started in the late 1990s. I think in Denmark, it was in Scandinavia, where it was an industrial sewing machine factory or something, and there was change being imposed. There were things being done to these workers, and they went, hang on a minute, we want to work with you. We want to sort through a solution. I don't know that co-design started in the late 1990s, everyone. I think co-design may well have been back in our Indigenous communities for hundreds of years.
Absolutely. Now, we're using co-design to build relationships based on trust and respect that will allow us to work together to create vibrant and resilient, sorry, it keeps jumping down to new messages, vibrant and resilient communities, landscapes and farmers in southern New South Wales. We're using co-design to identify research priorities. Fantastic. Using 2 face-to-face meetings and then follow-ups. It's an annual process. We're using co-design to identify the needs of the region based on the experience and knowledge of our on-the-ground partners, and as a basis to work with our partners, communities and industries to help address those needs. We're using co-design to identify research priorities with our grower stakeholders. It's challenging us to think about how to extend, and get grower input to research. We're using co-design to unlock human capital in regional and rural communities. We're using co-design to find better management options on insect pests. And Elisa, thank you. At the Science to Practice Forum, the Victorian Hub had their Creatives and Residents sum up the event in poetry. So there you go.
Oh, wow. Lisa, that's so fantastic. Well done. Love it. I love all of them. It's fantastic to hear that it's in place with so many of you. And I would just encourage you to find any forums, if you're asked to guest speak, or put your hand up to be a guest speaker, because, 2 years ago, I hadn't really heard of the word co-design either. And yet there'll be so many of us on today's call that will have been doing it for decades and will have an unwavering commitment to it. So the more we can speak up, the more we can put definition around co-design, the more it's going to help, in our instance, rural communities right across Australia and beyond.
And this is certainly something that I've been thinking about in our conversations, Jo, is, so I'm based in a very small country town and have an endless frustration with, people coming in and doing things to us instead of with us. And so to be able to say, well, hang on, we'd like to be able to co-design that with you is going to be really, really powerful. Now, I want to go back to your dairy example, because that raises an important question that I find comes up a lot when we talk about, getting any kind of engagement in the projects that we run, and it's about compensating people for their time if they're going to sit on an advisory committee or participate in a workshop. What are your feelings about that one?
Oh, wow. This is one I don't have an answer for, and I certainly wouldn't pretend to. I think it's a question that will have been raised for many of you, as you're clearly accomplished in your co-design processes and your journeys here. Do we pay people to sit around the table? And if we do, what do we pay them? How do we pay them? Who do we pay? Who don't we pay? Something tells me that if we start paying people end users, those with lived experience, to sit around the table, that it will attract people to sit who are attracted to money and not necessarily to the solution or providing the input to creating the solution, the service or the product. Yes, we did it. We paid 6 farmers across Queensland for Daring Beyond 2000, but we didn't pay for farmers to come and sit around a table and seek a solution to, something happening in their region. They were, I don't remember the name of them now, but some of you will know, they were like practice groups that existed. And the dairy industry, I think, is really great at that. And I think the grains industry currently has something like Top Crops, which kind of aligns to that philosophy as well.
And if you're not looking at compensating groups, what are the alternatives that you can do to encourage people to participate?
Yeah, so this comes back to, right, this is a third time we're kind of winding into this question of how do we get that engagement? For me, it's around the value proposition. It's around the designer or the facilitator being able to effectively say, this is what we are doing. This is what you can expect if you engage in this process with us. And this is what even though we won't know what the product, the service or the fix is, this is what you can expect will happen as we work through. So could you imagine if people knew that they were going to be privy to shared wisdom, if they were going to be privy to expertise, to recent cutting edge research, to specialist scientists, experts, why wouldn't you want to sit around the table and hear some of that stuff? I think that's what would be good to play up and foreground, that, by sitting around this table, this is what we do. It does draw upon, I think, a trait in people around community care. And so those people do want to sit around the table naturally. Are they the best people to sit around the table? Perhaps not. So it's around, being really conscious what people should sit around this table and for what purpose, and then to go and have a chat, over the tray of the ute and say, this is who I am, this is what I'm doing. I'm wondering, would you want to become engaged in this or not?
And Annabelle's very simply put in the chat that, the best way to get people engaged is to deliver value. But I think we're seeing a lot of engagement burnout because a lot of activities aren't delivering that value. If it's a one-off workshop that doesn't have any follow-up, people don't get to see outcomes. So, following through and doing what you say you're going to do is going to be really critical there. Now,
what's important with Annabelle's point there is, yes, it's about delivering the value, absolutely, because who wouldn't want that? But I think it's being aware of who can assist you to deliver that value. And so, who do you engage as the facilitator, or who do you engage as the co-designer? Because you certainly want the one who is really comfortable in sharing power. You want the one who understands that their role as a facilitator is to develop capability. You want people who are interested in the group and not in the individual. This is the kind of conscious decision making that I think, is important to do when you get into this space of co-design.
Okay, now I'm mindful that we are getting close to time, so we're going to move into a Q&A shortly. If you do have questions, start typing them in now. Jo, we did discuss that something that would be really useful to do at the end is a bit of a show and tell of resources, because you've recently presented at the Science to Practice Forum, and you said that most of the inquiries that you got after were for where can I go to learn more and do more, because obviously a 1 hour webinar is not going to make us all co-design experts, it's just going to move us a little bit further down along the path.
Yep.
I've put a couple of posts, links in the chat section as we've gone along, when we've mentioned some books and some experts and the Institute in New Zealand. But where else have you been and gone? And anyone online, if you've got particular co-design resources that you would like to share with the group, and you can chuck them in the chat section, that would be much appreciated as well too.
I was just about to say that, please, as we go, even if we double up, would you please let us know what resources you found that might be helpful? I'm really happy to pass on stuff that I've found. If you want, go and have a look at it. So the book that I have found is the one called Beyond Sticky Notes, which is by Kellyanne McKercher. I think you've got this on a resource list for later as well, so people don't have to madly write it down. Am I right, Prue?
I'm just popping them all in now as we talk about
cool.
them. I've popped this one in before, but we'll just do it again in case you missed it earlier.
Yep. And when you go through this book, it comes from a social innovation, so a social innovation change process. Please don't be put off by that. Co-design in Australia has been embedded into Royal Commission outcomes in terms of mental health sector and aged care sector. So those are the two sectors where co-design has been embedded. So hence it only makes sense that we get something out of the social space.
And Jo, that's something that we wanted to do through this webinar series is go, hey, where can we look to other sectors and go, oh, that's useful. How can we tweak it and apply it to rural and agricultural settings? So I still feel a very useful read and go, oh, yeah.
And the processes, sorry, Prue, the processes are fabulous, through this book. Big picture read. If you're a facilitator looking for how do I do a checklist or how do I do a worksheet or something like that, this is not for you. This one talks about mindsets. It talks about, what is it that you're wanting to have in the room in terms of this shared power. It kind of, brings into play some concepts that not all of us will have thought about before reading Kellyanne's book. Another handout, if you like, it's actually a PDF and it's available from Ingrid Burkett. So I really like the work of Ingrid Burkett. She's based in Queensland at a university there, and she just put out a PDF called What is Co-Design? It's available on her website, so it's easily downloadable. And I found that one really easy to read. So that's Ingrid Burkett. Another one is I draw heavily in my work from Emma Blomkamp. That's where these co-design approach or model comes from. And we're allowed to use this, and so are you. We're all allowed to use these approaches because they come out in the co-design space as having a Creative Commons attribution and share alike license, which means we're able to use it. We're even able to change it and adapt it because it builds into the sense of co-design, which is doing things together and collaboratively. Anything on Emma Blomkamp is worth a read. She does short training sessions as well, which I found really useful. And I've never seen anybody use a Jamboard, which is an online app, which I think is fabulous for co-design, especially if you're doing stuff online. I've never seen anybody use a Jamboard as well as what I have seen Emma Blomkamp do. She's based in Melbourne. She comes from New Zealand, and she's recognised as an international specialist. Another person who I found was Liz Sanders. Liz Sanders is based in the US, and she's been at co-design for around about 25 years or so, really pragmatic and straightforward, and she has a business called Make Tools. So you can peek at her there. And then, would you believe, I found an organisation in Adelaide. Some of you may well have heard of it, but it's the Australian Centre for Social Innovation. And I was so excited because they call it TAXI for short, in my conversations with them, I discovered that there were philanthropists who had funded co-design work in Western New South Wales. And here was I working with the Southern New South Wales Hub. And so we enjoyed a fabulous conversation around where this stuff is actually happening. Co-design is happening, and TAXI is a great place to find out what the latest and the brightest is here in Australia. And the last one is the Auckland Collab. So again, they work a lot with Indigenous people there, and I found their work to be really, really thorough, and lots of resources available in the Auckland Collab. So I hope some of those will be useful. I'm not sure if anybody popped up some resources that they might be calling upon, but if not, I hope that you find some of those ones useful, and a special thanks to the Southern Innovation Hub who allowed me the opportunity to do the research, and I'm really happy to pass that on.
Perfect. Now is the time to get your questions into Jo. And also, Jo's just mentioned some fantastic resources there, particularly TAXI. If you'd like to give me a thumbs up, if that would be something that you'd be interested in hearing in a future webinar series, will be continuing. So if some of those things that we've talked about is something that you'd like to continue with, give me a thumbs up or thumbs down, and you can just engage and plan some future activities there. We've got some good thumbs up happening there. Perfect. Now, questions, please get them in quickly because we are going to need to wrap up soon. Jo, anything that we've missed, anything that you want to talk about? What's your call to action to everyone today?
Look, my call to action is to go lightly, everybody. Be kind to ourselves. Co-design is not the panacea. It's not the absolutely new and you've got to go off and do a university degree in it. We're all doing it, in various shapes and sizes. There is no one size fits all. There is no perfect co-design process, and nor should there be. The other thing that I got really worried about, that I hope if I share this vulnerably with you, you'll kind of go, oh, thank gosh, was that I was reading about co-design approaches, co-design models, co-design methodologies, co-design philosophies, co-design tools, co-design tactics. And I'm thinking, oh my gosh, I'm never going to be able to get my head around any of this stuff. Emma Blomkamp, taught me well in terms of teaching me that just start where you're most comfortable, because even the smallest change that you do to engage people with higher levels of engagement, higher levels of participation, starting where everybody is at, engaging them in the process so that they will own and continue on the journey, has got to be a good thing. So be kind to yourselves. Don't go, oh no, I'm not doing it as well as that person, or I've just read about Ingrid Burkett's kind of definition and I'm certainly not doing that. Do the best that you can with what you've got. And I hope that I've inspired some of you today, or motivated some of you today to go out and even just Google co-design or have a look at some of these resources that Prue's popped up.
Thank you so much, Jo. That's fantastic.
There's no distance, and I don't know what that means.
I don't either. Hopefully it means that we're very comprehensive. All right, guys. Now, you will see a pop-up on your screen right now to register for our next webinar. This webinar series is held on the first Thursday of every month at 3 p.m. Australian Eastern Standard Time. So Jo mentioned earlier that, people have a propensity towards storytelling and communicate as a communication method. So our next meeting will be with Dr. Anika Molesworth, who will be talking about the importance of storytelling in communicating complexity, particularly as it relates to science in agricultural communities. So I'll pop that one up there. Now I am going to put the next one up now, which is in September. We're going to be meeting with Courtney Ramsey, who is a grower relations manager with the Grains Research and Development Corporation. And her topic is, let me read it out for you exactly so that I get it right. She's going to be talking to us about using behavioural science to design great RD&E, which I'm particularly excited about, because I think that we, go, oh, well, if we get throw numbers at people, they're going to change their practices. So this will be looking at how behavioural science can help us design really good RD&E activities. Now, once this webinar finishes, you'll be directed to a survey link. I know everybody hates this, but it would be very, very much appreciated if you could please fill it out for us. Last month, the average time spent was 37 seconds. So if you can spare that for us, it would be great. Your input is really important to us in planning and evaluating this and other activities. Thank you so much to everyone for joining in today. Jo Eady, thank you very much to you as well too. Thank you for participating in today's Expanded Horizons webinar delivered by the Southern New South Wales Drought Resilience Adoption and Innovation Hub, and I hope you all have a lovely day.
Bye everyone. Thanks for being here. Good luck.